Hi everyone, it's Teresa LaFleur, your instructor. We're going to talk about Chapter 3, from the Constitution to the Courtroom. So, Constitution is what determines if it's state or federal law. And there are several things that we need to know about this. Your supreme law is the law of the land, and that's why we have a federal Supreme Court. There are three branches: executive, congressional, and judiciary branches that you need to be aware of. The executive branch is the president and his cabinet, and the president does appoint those cabinet members. The second branch is Congress, and Congress is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and those are the ones who pass all of our legislation. And then you have the judiciary branch, which is, of course, our juries, our lawyers, the trials, and they are the ones who interpret whether the laws are constitutional. All right, the next type is administrative law, and this is the law that governs the activities of administrative agencies. So we're talking about agencies like the Centers for Disease Control, Federal Emergency Management, Drug Enforcement, those types of things. Now, common law. Common law is based upon interpretation of statutory or administrative law, one of the two. It comes from the principle of stare decisis, which means let the decision stand. So let's talk about the difference between criminal and civil law. So let's start with criminal. States the plaintiff in a criminal. Person charged is called a defendant, and they could face imprisonment. A crime is the performance of any act that is forbidden by law or the admission of an act required by law. So a felony is a crime punishable by death or imprisonment. A misdemeanor is a crime that is punishable by imprisonment and jail for less than 1 year or a fine. Now, it's also possible to have a civil case that could be a criminal case. It could be arising from it. So when you're looking at assault and battery, those could be criminal prosecutions, but they are normally a civil case. The purpose of the punishment are reformation, restraint, retribution, or deterrence. So that's what they're trying. If they are found guilty, that's any of the methods of those could be how they are punished. Now, in a criminal case, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil case, you only have to prove by the preponderance of the evidence. Either way. The most common civil lawsuit, especially in healthcare, is called a tort. And usually these are intentional acts, negligent acts, or strict liability. Intentional torts can be towards property or person. Negligence is the result of a performance of an act on a patient without using due care or failure to do something that is required. And strict liability is imposed upon a seller or manufacturer that causes physical harm. So let's talk about what happens during a lawsuit. In phase 1, this is where the patient realizes they've been injured or something isn't right. In phase 2 is where they seek the advice of an attorney regarding that harm. Phase 3 is where the trial can occur, which is nothing but a dispute between two parties before a judge and a jury. Phase 4 is right to appeal after the jury has made their decision. So what do you do if you're a witness? You want to make sure that you pay attention. It can be a little boring sometimes, but make sure that you're listening and you're aware of what's going on, what's being said. Excuse me. Behave in a professional manner. The way you look, present yourself, that makes a difference. Answer the question that you're asked, and only that question. Don't volunteer any information. Cooperate with your attorney. And remember, honesty is the best policy. And that's a quick overview of Chapter 3, excuse me. So now we're going to talk about Chapter 4 a little bit. And Chapter 4 is Criminal Acts and Intentional Torts. Alright, so we said Chapter 4. Let's talk about a criminal act. So a misdemeanor is less than a felony. And usually a misdemeanor is punishable by a year or less in prison and or a fine, either one. And a felony is a more serious crime. You're going to be in prison for a long time, or you could be punished by death. So let's talk about some of the crimes that are involved in felony. So robbery is the first one, and murder is your second. Your third is attempted murder. Fourth is euthanasia. And by the way, just to let you know, euthanasia is not a crime in all states. There are some states that do allow it. I was trying to remember where they were, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to look for that and find it for you. Manslaughter is another felony, and the difference between manslaughter excuse me, and murder is the act with the intent to kill. Manslaughter is unlawful killing without malice, so there's no intent. Conspiracy is another type of felony, and that's where two or more people get together and conspire to create or commit some unlawful act. Larceny is one, and larceny is stealing. Abuse is also considered here. So there are 3 types of abuse that medical people see. That's child abuse. And teachers, nurses, and other healthcare people are required to report this. There are several indications that you can look for child abuse. So if you have a child that is overly compliant, very passive or undemanding, that could be an indicator. Or just the opposite. If they're extremely aggressive, demanding, and rageful. They could also have role reversal parental behavior, so they're acting more like the parent. And then development, they could lag in how they're developing. Other physical indicators are bruises and welts, burns, lacerations, injuries, head injuries, internal injuries, these types of things. Another type of abuse is elder abuse, and this is where elderly people are abused. There's several different types. The first type is passive neglect. And they're just not taking care of them, basically. Active neglect, and this is where they intentionally don't do it. Financial abuse could be abuse of their money, using it for yourself instead of for them. And then physical abuse, again, of an elderly person. Domestic violence also falls under this, and this is the technical definition of domestic violence is a person who threatens to harm his or her spouse or intimate partner. That is the technical term. Sexual assault is also in this. And sexual assault is any type of sexual conduct or behavior that occurs without the explicit consent of the recipient. So all of these different things are criminal acts. And let me see if I can get over there to the end here now. Larceny, stealing, abuse, there's your 3 types. Elder abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault. Fraud, here we go. Fraud is a deliberate deception to produce. When you see it with healthcare, if you're looking at fraud, you're looking at upcoding or unbundling, usually are the two most common. Upcoding means you're coding for more than was actually done. Unbundling means items that were supposed to be built together, like a CVC, it's a panel, and you're breaking it out into separate items to get higher pay. That could be considered fraud. Also, for any fraudulent billing, so if the patient never showed but you're billing them for it, services provided even though they weren't there, that is considered fraud. Part of HIPAA was to evaluate the health plans and make sure everything is done appropriately so you don't have any of these fraud issues. Embezzlement is another thing that occurs in medical offices, and usually it's when somebody takes money that was supposed to be given for the office and they take the money and use it for themselves. Illegal sale of drugs is the same thing. Could be writing false prescriptions, taking medications from the office. These types of things are considered illegal sales of drugs. And then you have your intentional torts. So an intentional tort is basically an injury or some type of wrongdoing other than breach of contract. And there are several of them that are pretty important. Assault and battery. Assault is the attempt or threat to injure another person. The battery is non-consensual touching. Invasion of privacy. It's where you're looking into things that you don't need to be looking into. False imprisonment. Healthcare, where you see this, is if you actually restrain a patient. That could be considered false imprisonment unless you have the documentation as to reasoning why. False Claims Act is the next one. And defamation of character. Defamation of character is basically either saying or writing something. If it's written, it's libel. If it's spoken, it's slander. And then the intentional infliction of emotional distress, otherwise known as outrageous conduct. So this kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of chapters 3 and 4. See if this helps you, and if you need any further assistance, please let me know.